Coming in at number 10 as a bit of an honorable mention is the Batman Who Laughs. Now, the reason this villain is only getting an honorable mention is because he's relatively new and has had a huge amount of publicity in the few years since his creation. But I still do think this character deserves some more exploration further down the road. As a twisted combination of Bruce Wayne and the Joker from the dark multiverse, the Batman Who Laughs was an incredibly intimidating villain that only got even more powerful when he gained the powers of Dr. Manhattan and became the Darkest Knight. But seeing as how he was then killed by God Mode Wonder Woman, and I do think that the Batman Who Laughs deserves a comeback in the near future so that we can see what really happens when the true Batman and the Batman Who Laughs go head to head. Coming in at number 9, we have OWLMAN, the evil opposite of Batman from Earth 3. Born under the name of Thomas Wayne Jr., as a young boy, OWLMAN murdered his younger brother Bruce and had his butler Alfred kill his parents to ensure that the Wayne fortune was not wasted by their frivolous spending. Using his costumed identity as OWLMAN to intimidate the leaders of Gotham into falling under his control, OWLMAN was a twisted version of everything that Batman stood for, and every time their universes have crossed over has led to some incredibly dramatic battles. And with the DC Omniverse recently having become a lot more open than it was during the New 52 era, it's only a matter of time before OWLMAN and Batman are trying to outwit one another once more. Coming in at number 8, we have the malicious psychologist known as Hugo Strange. One of Batman's oldest villains, originally debuting only 9 issues after the Caped Crusader himself in Detective Comics, Professor Hugo Strange was also one of the very first villains to ever figure out his secret identity as Bruce Wayne. While initially depicted as a typical mad scientist stereotype, using a weather machine to hide his minions' robberies with a thick layer of fog, more recent interpretations of the character have seen him as a devious manipulator, using his position of power as a doctor of psychology to examine the criminals of Arkham Asylum and scheming to gain power in Gotham City. It's this emphasis on mental ability rather than actual superpowers that makes Hugo Strange such an interesting villain to deal with, and why he definitely deserves to come back in a major Batman storyline. Coming in at number 7, we have the intelligent zombie, Solomon Grundy. Inspired by a 19th century English nursery rhyme, Solomon Grundy was born centuries ago as a wealthy merchant, but after being murdered and having his body dumped in a swamp with mystical properties, he's now cursed to constantly be resurrected with slightly different properties each time. Usually being depicted as an incredibly physically strong zombie, Grundy is also incredibly resilient to both magic and physical damage, meaning that every time he's faced by either Batman or Superman, they need to figure out a clever new way to defeat him. Solomon Grundy has always been a dependable muscle for other villains throughout the years, but it would be nice to see him take more of a starring role in an upcoming Batman story. Coming in at number 6, we have CATMAN. Yep, that's not a typo, there's an actual Batman villain named CATMAN, and we'd love to see more of him in the comics as he continues to walk the fine line between villain and anti-hero. Born under the name Thomas Blake, CATMAN was initially a famous lion trapper that decided a life of crime was a better use of his peak human abilities, and even based his initial costume on that of the already established villain Catwoman. However, after years of being thwarted by Batman and becoming mocked by other supervillains, CATMAN reformed himself after some time in the jungle into becoming an anti-hero, and was most recently seen working alongside the Suicide Squad. With all of this character development making him more than just a joke character, CATMAN definitely deserves to face off against Batman once more. Coming in at number 5, we have Mr. Bloom, the plant-based villain. With the ability to plant seeds within people that would grant them incredible superpowers but at the cost of their lifespan, Mr. Bloom threw Gotham into chaos during a period where Bruce Wayne was unable to be Batman and Commissioner James Gordon had instead taken up the cape and cowl. The coolest thing about Mr. Bloom wasn't just the unique look of his powers and his visual design, but how they were able to manipulate the people and villains of Gotham into a new status quo so easily. Seeing this villain have a rematch with Bruce Wayne, or even get to interact more with the similarly plant-based Poison Ivy, seems like an obvious choice for a comeback, and I can't wait to see what this villain does next. Coming in at number 4, we have Prometheus. While not an alternate reality version of Bruce Wayne like several other villains on this list, Prometheus is still a dark reflection of the Batman, given that he had to watch his criminal parents be gunned down Bonnie and Clyde style by Gotham City police forces. Waging war against law enforcement and justice of any kind, Prometheus is made all the deadlier with his helmet that allows him to download fighting skills directly into his brain. It's this deadly combo of physical prowess and ideological differences that make Prometheus one of the more interesting Bat villains, and someone who definitely needs to be featured more often. Coming in at number 3, we have the iconic Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. Originally fighting for the side of justice with Bruce Wayne as Gotham's district attorney, Harvey Dent's mind was split in two following an acid attack that scarred exactly one half of his face. Making all of his decisions through a coin flip based on his past childhood trauma, Two-Face is one of the most well-known villains of Batman, but hasn't gotten a chance in recent years to really headline an event as a villain, usually only taking the focus in smaller storylines or as a supporting character. Personally, I think Two-Face is long overdue to take his place as a master of the criminal underworld. Coming in at number 2, we have Bruce Wayne's former childhood friend and current adulthood enemy, Hush. Born under the name of Thomas Elliot, Hush as a child was one of the first people to inspire Bruce on his road to becoming Batman. However, Thomas Elliot was a deranged child, wishing to have his family's fortune for himself and killing both of his parents to have it. After traveling the world and training to become a warrior, Hush adopted his supervillain persona and allied himself with the Riddler to rid the world of Bruce Wayne, organizing many of his enemies and even allies against him. And while the villain has appeared several times since, it's been a while since we've truly gotten to see the master manipulator Hush at work. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the Phantasm, aka Andrea Beaumont. Originally debuting in the animated film Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, Andrea Beaumont was Bruce Wayne's first love, the girl he almost considered abandoning his mission as Batman for before the mission had even begun. Unfortunately for Bruce, Andrea and his relationship was forced to an end by the death of her father, causing Andrea to begin her descent into becoming the vengeful spirit known as the Phantasm. As a villain with an incredibly cool design and a very personal connection to Batman, the Phantasm has been only recently seen in the comics, and definitely takes my top pick for the villain that most deserves another storyline.
In at 10, Sin Eater. Stanley Carter's parents were addicts who ended up falling in love with each other. Stanley's father, though, later died, leaving Stanley's mother pregnant and alone. Stanley's mother was sent to a rehabilitation clinic, and Stanley went to be raised by his grandparents in the Ozark Mountains. Stanley's grandfather was a zealous pastor who reveled his son and took it out on Stanley. After Stanley's grandfather died due to a rattler bite, this congregation held a sin-eating ritual for him, and young Stanley presumably saw a Sin Eater, a masked hermit who would eat fruit placed in the corpse of someone's body to take the dead sins for himself, because, you know, that's not gonna screw up a child's development. Stanley ended up joining the NYPD and became a detective after growing up, having multiple instances of executing criminals, particularly drug traffickers, including his own partner. This is where he really became the Sin Eater, a maniacal serial killer and probably one of Spider-Man's scariest foes with no powers, but with the MO of killing anyone who sins. The Sin Eater's first victim was actually his own lover, police captor Jean DeWolf, whose death attracted attention throughout all New York City, including their friend Spider-Man. The Sin Eater had stolen DeWolf's purse, creating a precedent of taking one personal object for each of his victims, and this object would usually have to be associated with the victim's sin in some way. It's probably gonna be a loose way, but yeah. In at 9, Atrocity. Introduced and only seen in the Spider-Man game Spider-Man Edge of Time from 2011, Atrocity was created after Anti-Venom went into a blind rage, accidentally knocked Otto Octavius and Walker Sloan into Walker Sloan's gateway. It was like a time gateway. The three fused in the space-time continuum. I tried getting Taylor to put this on a list for ages, so I'm gonna put it here because holy damn, this is one hell of a villain that I want to see come back. Atrocity would occasionally attack Peter Parker or Miguel O'Hara with its teleporting tentacles throughout their journey in outer Alchemax's building, until it eventually revealed itself and attacked Peter Parker. Atrocity was defeated but would later appear again, attempting to kill Peter Parker at the same time the CEO was fighting Miguel O'Hara. Peter manipulated Atrocity into attacking electrified pillars, stunning it. Peter took this opportunity to remove those tentacles and send them through the time gateway. These tentacles were also used to drain the Alchemax CEO of his powers. After both Atrocity and the CEO, who is revealed to be Peter Parker, were vulnerable, they were knocked into the gateway together, simultaneously resetting the timeline. This absolute monstrosity is able to teleport through time and space, in addition to all of his other powers. So yeah, Atrocity for sure needs to make a comeback. I want to see this guy. He only appeared once. He's probably one of the most horrifying looking villains of all time. Please. And at 8, Mr. Negative. Martin Lee was a seemingly good-willed philanthropist who ran a volunteer soup kitchen called Feast, where May Parker volunteered, because of course she did. While he was also the crime boss of Chinatown, Mr. Negative. Despite being a crime lord, Lee was seemingly a kind and generous man. The Feast project displayed healing powers for people of various illnesses, although the cause of this healing was actually unknown, but it turned out to be Lee himself. The public knows that the person known as Martin Lee was an illegal Chinese immigrant who attempted to travel to America to be with his wife. In China, he ran a factory, but because of his lack of resources to bribe the Communist Party, he could not develop his business and grew tired of that country. Although this Martin Lee is not actually Martin Lee, but a former smuggler who just used Lee's identity after he died. Mr. Negative first came into conflict with Spider-Man when he made a power play towards taking control of New York's criminal underworld by attempting to wipe out all existing members of the Criminali and Magia crime families, using a DNA-specific bioweapon called Devil's Breath. Mr. Negative is also responsible for the creation of Anti-Venom, and while he was featured in the 2018 Spider-Man game, it's been like 3 years, so he needs to show up again. And at 7, The Spot. As a scientist working for the Kingpin, Dr. Own was assigned to reproduce the radiation levels of the Vigilante cloak to find a way to artificially mimic his powers. Working late one night, he actually succeeded, creating a solid black circular portal. In doing so, however, the drain on the city's power became so great a blackout washed over the city, causing the portal to shimmer and destabilize. Fearful of losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Own stepped into it, which was a horrible idea. The power shortage caused the portal to send him into a different dimension, a place of half darkness and half light, kinda like my mind. When Own emerged back in his lab, his body had undergone a radical transformation. The portals from the other dimension had adhered to his skin, covering him from head to toe in black spots. But just think about how crazy OP this villain is, alright? He has the ability to control these portals. Like, if the man wanted to decapitate you, instantly he could. Best doctor in a sense, I guess. That's still horrifying. The Spider-Man in the 90s cartoon would use these portals against Ohm, but if he had just decided that he wanted to just destroy him, he could have. And Spider-Man would have had nothing to do. So, yeah, I want to see him make an appearance again, somehow. And at 6, Spider-Cide. Spider-Cide is a more obscure and odd Spider-Man villain, but I still think he would be pretty badass. Being first introduced as Spider-Cide in New Warriors number 61, this version of Peter Parker is one of the clones made by Dr. Miles Warren, because we all know how much we love clones, which is an entirely separate villain that caused the whole clone debacle and creation of Scarlet Spider and a whole lot of other things. What's notable about Spider-Cide, however, is not only him having all of Spider-Man's powers, but also the ability to stretch and warp his body at will, similar to Mr. Fantastic. Spider-Cide is certainly deadly as well, helping Jackal to release a virus in Springfield, Pennsylvania, resulting in the deaths of 2,600 people. But either way, Spider-Cide, with all the abilities of Spider-Man and Mr. Fantastic, makes him pretty damn powerful, so I want to see him come back. They didn't do much with him, okay? And I like the name Spider-Cide. Any evil Spider-Man, really, just bring me more. Halfway through into number 5, Red Goblin. After the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Carnage symbiote was secured in the Lockbox, a privately run vault at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Agents Crane and Coleman infiltrated the Lockbox and stole the symbiote, delivering it to their employer, Norman Osborn. Yeah, you see where this is going. After receiving the symbiote, Osborn bonded with it to become the new Carnage, hoping that it would be the key to regaining his Green Goblin persona. While the symbiote initially seized control of him, Norman offered to teach it more nuanced and sadistic ways to kill, an offer that the symbiote eagerly accepted. The fact that you know more sadistic ways to kill people than a freaking mad symbiote is a whole other topic though, dude. The symbiote turned over control to its new host, restoring his appearance and purging his body of the nanites, preventing him from augmenting himself with Goblin formula. Osborn used the symbiote to kill Phil Urich, and after pretending to be mortally wounded in a rematch against Spider-Man as the Green Goblin, unveiled his new partner by transforming into the monstrous Red Goblin. Osborn used the symbiote to great effect, incapacitating irritating Spider-Man's allies and loved ones, and bonding a portion of the symbiote to his grandson to turn him into the new Goblin child. Spidey was only able to defeat Red Goblin by taunting Osborn, saying that killing him would only give Carnage the credit and not him, which caused Osborn to remove the symbiote from himself. So he couldn't defeat Red Goblin, he had to defeat Osborn. Yeah, this is one of my favorite Carnage versions, so I want to see this come back, please. Like the next Venom movie. Or a No Way Home. In at number 4, Demogoblin. After losing fights with Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, Jason Philip Macendale Jr., aka Hobgoblin, took advantage of the Inferno Crisis by following several demons back to their lair and confronting their demonic lord Natshir. Macendale wanted enough power to defeat his enemies, and offered his soul to the demon in exchange for such power. When the demon stopped laughing, he decided that Macendale's effort was worth something even if his soul wasn't, and he had him possessed. This gave Macendale the physical strength that he craved, coupled with superhuman speed and endurance. Unfortunately, I guess you could say for him at least, the demon who possessed him proved to be incompatible, and the two fought many a battle for control over Macendale's physical form until the demon literally ripped himself out of his human host and began a separate existence as the Demogoblin, a form of anti-hero in a sense who would kill anyone who has sinned, which is basically everyone. Except he would stay away from children, even dying to protect one. Getting close to the end in at number 3, Shocker. Okay, he's not really a forgotten villain, but Herman Schultz's parents died when his younger brother Marty was a boy. From a young age, Schultz turned to a life of crime, and soon realized that he wasn't really good at it, having been arrested several times. After one particular robbery gone wrong, Herman was arrested again, but was sent to the prison workshop, where he used the resources around him to build projects and build gauntlets that sent out shock waves which quickly opened safes as well, giving him a much needed one-up on the authorities. Now, I know what you're thinking, okay? Why am I talking about Shocker? Everyone knows who he is. Well, have you seen the MCU version of this guy? Okay, we need a better one. Come on, give me an actual Shocker. Shocker has the ability to shock his enemies with his handheld vibro shock units, but because the vibrations were so fierce, he has to wear a heavily insulated suit, which kind of looks like a mattress, but still. During his first outing as the self-styled Shocker, he ran into and defeated Spider-Man. Plus, I mean, he's the Shocker, I shock people. Give me a better version, okay? With his seemingly minute introduction into the MCU, I want to see a better version. Do it! But ultimately, in at number 2, The Swarm. Fritz von Meyer was once a fascist scientist, the details of which remain unrevealed. But von Meyer fled Germany at the end of World War II to settle in South America. A work expert on toxic poisons and apiculture, which is beekeeping, he continued his research on the breeding patterns of killer bees. One day, he found a hive unlike any other he had ever seen. The bees exhibited no fear and were unusually passive, and seemed to have a highly developed sense of intelligence. Believing that a nearby meteorite bombardment had somehow mutated these bees, von Meyer built a device that he hoped would reawaken the bees' killer instincts so that they could serve him. However, when they were no longer passive, they began to swarm all over von Meyer, killing him. In the midst of his death though, his consciousness was shredded, dissipating into the swarms of bees. Thus, von Meyer became an aggregate being, like a living embodiment of the swarm. Kind of like Spider-Man, but with bees. This is probably one of the weirdest but most fascinating villains I've ever seen, and certainly deserves a comeback. However, not as much as number 1, but I gotta admit, being named Fritz and then having your agony possess a whole load of bees, that's getting too close to FNAF for me, okay? I don't like it. Finally, in at number 1, Spider-Carnage. We all knew this was going to be on the list, at least if you know me and my favorite Spider-Man villains. However, Spider-Carnage isn't just a Spider-Man villain, he's an alternate version of Spider-Man. Hailing from one of the many Earths, this character was introduced in the 90s Spider-Man animated series, my favorite Spider-Man animated series, might I add. This Peter's life was actually very similar to the main Spider-Man, except this version also lost Aunt May and developed a resentment for humanity. And then he had to deal with a clone, which definitely sucked. Until he and the clone learned that the one who they thought was the clone, who was going by Ben Reilly at the time, could actually be the real Peter Parker, and that broke this Peter. A Carnage symbiote from another universe actually sensed this hatred and resentment, and through a portal created by Jonathan Ohm, it bonded with this Peter, driving him even more insane, and then started calling himself Spider-Carnage. From my understanding, this character hasn't been seen since that final episode of the series, and I want him to make a comeback. Please, add this character to the MCU. Like, if we're getting 3 Spider-Man, why not just throw Carnage from some other universe in there too, and then have him bond with like Tobey's, because apparently Tobey's a bad person now. Even though I'm dressed like the Spider-Man 3 version, yes, that's exactly why I wore this suit today, specifically for that reason. But Yeah.
Number 10, CRIMELORD. He might not be one of the most powerful on this list, but I've been really loving the Doom Patrol series so far. I have to get caught up on season 3 personally, but wow, did that series get me super invested in this team. At one point, one of the enemies they face is former teammate Mento, aka Steve Dayton in the show. In the show, we learned Steve Dayton and Rita Farr, who some might know in the comics as Elastigirl, used to date. In fact, in the comics, Steve and Rita were even married. Just like in the show where Mento appears to be both ally and misguided enemy to the team, in the comics, Dayton was also a criminal at one point, becoming the villain known as CRIMELORD. His plan in the comics involved framing Deathstroke for murder and placing nuclear bombs the world over, threatening pretty much the entire Earth cause nuclear bombs. In the end, he was defeated and would become a hero once more. Mento gets his powers from his Mento helmet, which increases the strength of his otherwise low-level psionic abilities. With his helmet, he becomes both telepathic and telekinetic, can fly, and can even control the minds of others. Number 9, Gorilla Grodd. One of Gorilla Grodd's main powers was his force of mind. He was able to use his mind to manipulate the thoughts and senses of others, and he could also use it to take control of people and bend them to his will, or even take their form for himself. Being that Gorilla Grodd is also quite intelligent, he has also found ways to even influence others into adoring him. Back in the New Earth continuity, Grodd once devised a plan to win the heart of the gorilla lady that he loved by making his body emanate a neo-magnetic force that made him instantly liked by those who made his acquaintance, gorilla or human. He succeeded in wooing his lady love, and later would use the same acquired power to influence the people of Central City, almost becoming governor and plotting to use his influence to become the president of the United States thereafter, if he succeeded. Of course, Flash ended up figuring out what was going on and foiled Grodd's plans before they could bear fruit. So no President Grodd for us. Sad. I want to see that plan come to fruition. Unless that's already happened and I somehow missed it, but I don't think so. Number 8, Annihilation. Annihilation is the entity that is believed to be a demonic god. It rules over the Amenthi demon army and is typically attracted to those who are strong enough to defeat it, or defeat its current host, at least. Whoever beats Annihilation must then take its golden helm up for themselves. Wearing the golden helm of Annihilation basically gives you control over the Amenthi army, somewhat, but at the expense of ruling over yourself fully, as it bends you to its will. This is how Annihilation tricked and gained control of Genesis, Apocalypse's wife, who ruled over Arakko and its mutants. She managed to beat Annihilation in battle, only to realize too late that the fight had kind of been a trick. She became the new Annihilation and was forced to merge together the forces of Amenth and of Arakko, becoming the new leader of both groups. Refusing to do so would have meant the Amenthi demons would have been left to run wild, as they would have no guide and no leader, and would then have certainly destroyed the mutants of Arakko otherwise. So Genesis was in a hard place. She was like, I guess I kind of got to do it to save my people, but also then I'm going to kind of lose myself because I'm going to become Annihilation. Dang. Number 7, Brother Blood. Brother Blood is a pretty terrifying villain, to be honest. His mind control comes from accessing his victim's blood, and through getting their blood, there is a whole slew of powers he can exert over you. Brother Blood in the current continuity can use the blood of his enemies to heal, rip open teleportation portals, and even project energy. Oh, and he also gains the powers of those whose blood he has tasted. And of course, once he has your blood, he can also use it to control you, bending you to his will and making you do his bidding. Not only does that mean you're in danger of losing your own free will if you go up against him, but it also means that you have to deal with all of his servants who have already kind of surrendered and are puppeted by him. He also happens to be a weirdly likable guy, so it's pretty easy for him to attract even willing followers who he can then use much more easily as pawns for his own evil plots. And they're all like, yes, we like the blood, the Church of Blood. Number 6, Purple Man. Although Purple Man sometimes can be seen as having a bit of a weakness when it comes to his power set or when it comes to just certain people he comes up against, Kilgrave is still pretty off the charts when it comes to all that he has achieved and is capable of. He can easily influence his opponents to do whatever he wishes simply by suggesting them to do it. However, it's also been implied that his powers can only work when his target can actually audibly hear his command. Now, if this were true, that would make him weaker. But in reality, in the comics anyways, Kilgrave's powers are actually pheromone based, which means he simply has to be in the vicinity for you to become a helpless victim of his. And if you couldn't hear him, you'd probably still do what he wanted you to do. In the Jessica Jones Netflix series, David Tennant played Kilgrave, and that show really showed just how much of a monster and a powerhouse this villain can be. At one point, Dr. Doom even managed to use Kilgrave's power to rule the world. And at another point in time, in another reality, I guess I should say, Purple Man actually does rule the world. And that's what actually comes about creating the 1602 universe, because he tries to get rid of the people that would basically rise up against him, putting them in 1602, and then everything gets wonky there. And Purple Man alone is apparently capable of controlling over 100 people at a time by himself. So yeah, that's a lot. Number 5, Emma Frost. Emma Frost is one of the most powerful mutant telepaths in the Marvel Universe. Actually, hold that. One of the most powerful telepaths, period, in the Marvel Universe, mutant or not. She has given the likes of Professor Charles Xavier a run for his money and has managed to duke it out psionically with mental heavyweights like Jean Grey. The only reason we are ranking her so low for a villain who possesses powerful mind control abilities is because she's really more of a hero these days. But she did start out as a villain in the comics, and it's important to remember that with Emma. In fact, that's a big part of what makes her such an interesting and compelling character, I think, today. Emma can influence a person's thoughts, manipulate them to do what she wants, and even alter their memories. In her days as a villain, she definitely used her powers to make others do her bidding, even compelling her victims to kill at her behest. Emma as a villain is scary. Emma would be more scary as a villain today, too. I kind of want Emma to be a villain again for a little bit. I just feel like she's a great hero, but she's also a great villain. I don't know. She's just great. The end. Number 4, Xemnu. Xemnu is also known as the Living Hulk and is a being that uses hypnosis powers to take control of others' minds. On more than one occasion, he has attempted to use these powers to conquer Earth and bend the minds of its entire populace to his will. In fact, while he's also attempted this feat in the pages of Immortal Hulk, this was also something he tried in his very first appearance. Back then, he was trying to mind control the human race in order to get them to build him a ship to return him home. Doesn't sound like such an evil plan, until you realize the force of the ship that he'd have the Earth build would actually rip it asunder once it took off and destroy it completely, due to the great force needed for it to launch. Number 3, Maxwell Lord. Maxwell Lord's power set has changed over time, but the fact remains that when it comes to taking control or influencing others in the DC universe, he's pretty much one of the best. He has taken control of the minds of some of the most powerful heroes in DC, such as Superman and Martian Manhunter. And because his powers have fluctuated over his history as a character, so have his power levels, with him at one point being able to extend his telepathic reach to manipulate the minds of billions at a time on Earth. Pretty crazy stuff. In the DCEU in Wonder Woman 1984, Maxwell Lord was a failed businessman who gained the power to grant others wishes, and through that amassed power for himself, besides with said wish granting also being kinda like a monkey's paw that generally came with some kind of catch or negative aspect. However, in the comics, Maxwell Lord doesn't even need an artifact to control the minds of others, which makes him even more deadly. And even if he didn't have like powers, he's still like super charismatic and persuasive, so he could probably just convince you to do what he wants you to do just by like being all smooth and charming. Number 2, Onslaught. Onslaught is one of the most powerful telepathic and telekinetic minds we've ever seen our Marvel heroes face. At one point, he threatened the existence of most of the superpowered heroic community in Marvel and seemingly killed a lot of them, and that was because he was basically threatening the entire world. Fortunately, they were rescued by young Franklin Richards and his reality warping powers. Onslaught is an entity created out of the combined minds of Professor Charles Xavier and Magneto that was created when Xavier broke Magneto's mind, seemingly wiping it but actually taking part of it into himself. Merging with his own suppressed dark emotions, Onslaught was created. While Onslaught is most powerful in many ways, the entity can also implant ideas ideas in the minds of even the strongest telepaths, encouraging them to do his bidding as he sees fit, though generally he seems to prefer to strong-arm people for the most part when push comes to shove. He has like a lot of like psychic abilities, but I feel like he's also just like telekinetically like, I'll just punch you into outer space. Number 1, Starro the Conqueror. Starro can literally conquer entire worlds and actually has done that before. And on more than one occasion, they have also almost conquered Earth as well. Starro is a giant space starfish who in their first appearance took on the first formation of the Justice League in The Brave and the Bold issue number 28, where they threatened to, you guessed it, conquer the world. While in the Suicide Squad film, Starro the Conqueror was a cruel nickname given to Starro by the Thinker, who is in charge of the experimentation on that imprisoned alien, that poor imprisoned alien. In the comics, it was a name earned by Starro because they had conquered so many worlds already. Starro basically creates lots of smaller starfish babies or spores, which can then latch onto individuals and take over their minds. In the Suicide Squad, this is made even more horrifying, as to be controlled by a Starro baby also means that you are now dead and basically just a husk. But in the comics, possibly even more terrifying still than that prospect is the revelation that Starro doesn't need to get one of their babies on you to control you. They can also do that through infecting your subconscious, or in more recent incarnations, just with their willpower. No babies or spores needed. Although fortunately in the comics, you know, if a baby or a spore attaches to you, doesn't mean you're dead. You can still come back.